Brandy and I will co-chair this meeting. Chris Rembolt will guide us through the agenda. So pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GL Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's June 16th, 2021 revised order extending remote participation by all members in any meeting of a public body. This meeting, the Great Barrington Select Board and Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and general guidelines for remote participation, members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. Pursuant to MGL 7C 30A Section 20F, after notifying the chair of the public body, any person may make a video or audio recording of an open session of a meeting of a public body or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Beginning of the meeting, the chair shall inform other attendees of any such recordings. This meeting is being recorded by Berkshire Ed, Berkshire Eagle, by the town, and by CTSB. Any member of the public wishing to speak at the meeting must receive permission of the chair. Listing of agenda items are those reasonably anticipated by the chair, which may be discussed at the meeting. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by law. I have a couple of housekeeping items to start with. Nan just told me she's going to record, and that's fine. Anyone in the public may record. Eric, do you want to start?
Did you want to do attendance, Steve?
Yeah, we can do that first. Thank you, Brandy. Why don't you go ahead with the planning board?
Sure. Jonathan?
Here.
Pedro?
Here.
Malcolm?
Here.
Jeremy?
Here. Here.
And Brandy, I'm here.
So, select board, Garfield?
Here.
Eric?
Here.
Ed?
Here.
Lee?
Here.
And I'm here, so both boards are here. Eric, your announcement?
Yes, Steve. After talking with the State Ethics Committee multiple times over the last week or so, I have to recuse myself from this discussion again. I got a lot of emails after the last time, so I just kind of want to explain why I was advised to recuse myself. So I do own my primary residence. I also own two other houses in Housatonic, which are rental units. So when I brought this to the attention of the Ethics Committee, they advised me that they said the only way I could participate in this conversation is if my interest is shared with 10% of the town citizens. And since I do, it's two other houses with 5 apartments total, which are all long-term leases. But he just advised me that I had to recuse myself. So I did ask for a second opinion, and it basically came back as the same. So I am allowed to participate via Citizen Speak, but with my hat on as a select board member, I cannot. So
Thank you, Eric.
thank you.
The other thing I was going to mention is that there's a link on the town website under the Select Board Planning Board Housing Subcommittee. There's a link to all the emails that we've received, and the meeting videos are posted on that same web page. So if you want to see all the emails that we've received, they are there for any members of the public to look at. And having said that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. And thanks to those of you in the audience. If I could presume, Steve, just to let folks know, there's 25 people in the audience who are not panelists. But anyway, thank you, Planning Board and Select Board, for being here. I think tonight while the boards have discussed some draft bylaws that Lee has done a lot of work on and the housing subcommittee has discussed, we thought it might be valuable tonight to take a little bit of a step back and think about short-term rentals on a broader level. So the agenda, I hope that we can talk about tonight includes discussing. Are you okay?
Yes.
Okay. Discussing the impacts generally of short-term rentals on the community, discussing some of the objectives you might have for regulating short-term rentals, discussing the strategies to do so, to regulate them, to enforce them, to compensate for community impacts, and to hopefully arrive at some consensus about how to move forward, whether it's the planning board, whether it's the select board, or both, towards those objectives. In the packet for tonight, we've put together a little bit more information to help you in that regard. It includes some basic data about what we know about the existing short-term rentals in our community, includes a little bit of information about the regulations that we already have on file. So not only how the building code and fire code look at short-term rentals, but also what is and is not allowed as per the zoning bylaw. There's a list, a kind of table of maybe pros and cons you might want to think about, which will probably help you. I hope you flesh it out a little bit in your discussion, and I hope it sets some of the groundwork for moving forward as you think about some of the reasons to regulate short-term rentals or not. I believe the housing subcommittee looked at short-term rentals purely on a housing basis and an affordable housing basis at that. And so it's probably prudent and wise to look at it as broadly as you can. And maybe there are different reasons to regulate it, housing being just one. So we'd like you to think about all of those. There's a quick review of the lodging tax revenue that the town has realized from short-term rentals, including hotels and motels over the years. You'll see in that chart in the packet that the short-term rental tax is included, but it comes in as just a lump sum, even. So it's included with hotels and motels. But you'll see that the year that short-term rental tax started being collected, you'll see that those years bump up quite significantly in terms of tax revenue. And just following that chart, there's a quick reminder that it is possible for town meeting to vote to impose additional community impact fees on certain types of short-term rentals. We also thought it might be good background for you, rather than including the entire 2020 housing needs report, which I know that the housing subcommittee is familiar with, just to at least include the implementation section. So a quick overview of the housing situation as we saw it in 2020 at least, and a quick snapshot of that local housing picture. And finally, at the end of the packet is the most recent updated draft bylaw for discussion from Lee, which I know she's worked on quite a bit, and she can speak to that when you're ready to do so. So Steve, Brandy, I'll turn it over to you, and hopefully we can discuss those impacts and some of the objectives that the board members may have.
Brandy, you want to go ahead or you want me to? You're muted, Brandy. Brandy, you're muted.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, would you like to step through just real briefly for the benefit of the folks that are participating in this meeting, some of this specific information that's in our packet as far as housing availability and some of those statistics so that everyone is level set on what information we're making decisions from?
Sure, we can do that.
Okay.
Someone has their hand up, and I'm going to assume this is just a process question. So let me, Gabriella, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to ask about as Eric just did, about Jonathan potentially recusing himself from this as well, since he, I believe, owns
That's
property.
That's Jonathan's choice, and that's nothing. If
Oh.
Jonathan wants to answer that, he can, but it's not, I'm not getting into that tonight. Jonathan, do you have anything you want to say?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, so as stated in your packet, there is about 3,600 housing units in Great Barrington. I don't have the exact count from the 2020 census just yet. We know from the 2020 housing needs study that there's essentially a 0% vacancy rate for rental units, whether it's low income units, whether it's middle income units, whether it's higher income units, higher priced units. The median gross rent we know from the 2020 study is about $900 per month. I suspect that's a little low. In any case, just comparing that to a short-term rental rate of $150 per night, you could realize that $900 in just 6 nights if you were doing a short-term rental versus a long-term rental. So an interesting just comparison there. There was a question about how many second homes there were in Great Barrington and how many might be listed as short-term rentals. There's about 415 according to the assessor's office. That's 12% of the total housing units. There are 200 or so short-term rentals registered with the state on the Mass Department of Revenue. Approximately 56 of those are also on our second home list. So that's about 28% of the 200 registrations for short-term rentals. 28% of those short-term rentals are second homes. We know from some of the data that we've gathered from speaking with Granicus and other host compliance companies that about 90% of the 200 short-term rentals are entire homes. And that's some of the data that Lee and the Housing Committee have also discussed. How many homes may be impacted by some of the draft bylaws that Lee and the Housing Committee have discussed. The existing regulations there, I thought were important just so you could understand the playing field that you're operating in right now. In zoning now, as an accessory use, a resident homeowner can rent rooms to up to 3 boarders, not 3 rooms, 3 boarders by right. So that's if you're a resident. You can do that now by right. There's no special permit, there's no site plan review. That's available now. Lodging houses, which is more than 3 rooms, but less than 11 rooms, they're allowed only by special permit. This has been the case since at least 1960. So if you have one that predates that, you may be legally non-conforming. If you have one since then that doesn't have a special permit, then it's not conforming. Similarly with hotels and motels, which is essentially 11 or more rooms, 11 to 45 rooms is the cap, 11 to 45 rooms, may be permitted by special permit in commercial and industrial zones only, but hotels are not permitted at all in residential zones in Great Barrington. This has been the case since at least 1960. So if you have one since 1960 in a residential zone, something that is not a by right accessory use or a special permit lodging house, if you're a hotel, that would be not be legally pre-existing non-conforming. The building codes may change soon, but currently a building, if you were to be operating a short-term rental out of the single-family home and not live there, the building code and fire code would treat you as a hotel. So there are some possible code issues there. I put that in there just for your information because if we do discuss things like local enforcement, I'd like you to be aware and cognizant of the fact that inspecting 200 short-term rentals may have staff impacts. So I'll stop there, I think, on page 1. Hopefully that's helpful so far. Okay. page 2 of the packet, which maybe this will form the backbone of your conversation tonight, some of the possible benefits and drawbacks of short-term rentals. This includes some of the housing things that we've already discussed and that the subcommittee has discussed in more detail. And it includes many of the things that you've heard in emails and letters from citizens so far. So I'll let you read that and respond to that and add your own things. I think this would be a good basis for discussion.
I think too, at the bottom of page 2 of the page 3, it's page 3 of the packet, but the possible purposes of a new regulation. I think if we can come out of today's meeting knowing, what we want to regulate and what the purpose is and be real clear about it, I think that is a really good goal for us to set for today.
I agree, Brandy.
Chris, may I communicate out some of those suggested purposes?
Yes, feel free.
So Chris has done a little bit of thinking on this and gathered information from the subcommittee, but also from his engagement both with the select board and the planning board. So some of the potential purposes for new regulation would be to regulate whether residents or non-residents may operate short-term rentals. To regulate.
You have sorry, Brandy, and that's the model that Lee has put forward to you.
Mm-hmm. To regulate the types of structures in which they may occur, to regulate where or when they may operate. So that would be, what zoning district they might operate in, or if there's a seasonal component, to set certain standards with which short-term rentals must comply. So some communities have required health inspections or life safety inspections, to require licensing and registration in order to level the lodging playing field, and to collect impact fees to offset impacts on public services and to potentially provide a source of revenue for affordable housing supply. So those are the ones that Chris had provided to us just to get the juices flowing.
It might be helpful, someone's just asked me, Chris, is it possible for you to share your screen and have these on the screen? It is for those people in the audience, it is on the town website. If you go on the calendar and the packet is under today's date.
So while Chris is bringing that up, I'll just throw out for discussion, so I think we need to start with, do we need a short-term rental bylaw of any sort, be it a zoning bylaw or some other bylaw? Just looking at the numbers that Chris has provided to us, the short-term rentals being roughly 200 out of 3,600 homes in the community, that's 5% of the housing stock. So I think that's a threshold question we need to answer.
May I?
Please.
That's been my question from the beginning of this. Is the subcommittee, they skip step 1, which is how big is the problem and what are we trying to accomplish, and right to how do we limit short-term rentals. I don't think they considered anything else, other things we could do to help with the housing issue. But that aside, the goals that are stated aren't specific. How many units are we? Let me back up a second. There will be pros and cons to this, right? Laws are messy. There will be negative impacts, which Chris has delineated. How many units, how many long-term units are we trying to get? One question. At what price range does that matter is another question. And then what are the negative impacts? We know there will be things like impacts to the landlords, impacts to the local economy, impacts to taxpayers. in order to decide if the benefits outweigh the detriments, we need to know those numbers. The last, from what Chris just said, we're looking at 56, possibly 56 units that will not be allowed to do short-term rental under this proposal. We don't know how many of those are owned by second homeowners who can afford to not rent them, and therefore they still won't be available. Former Great Barrington residents who've retired somewhere warmer, who are not going to sell their house or put it for a long-term rental because they need it when they come back. So we have I have no idea how many units we're looking to create from this, and what are the costs to do it. And I would love to have that before we go too much further, even tonight.
Pedro?
Yeah, with
go ahead.
respect, I'm sorry, with respect, that's one aspect, certainly, the affordable housing aspect. How many housing units could be freed up and made possible for long-term rentals? That's one aspect, yes, which we should cover. There are other possible reasons to regulate, which we haven't discussed. So, and if you don't want this on screen, just let me know.
No, I think it's fine. Steve, did you want to add something? You kind of froze there for a minute. You look like you were about to say something.
No, there are a couple people with their hands up, Randy. So if you want to just, board members.
Sure.
Recognize them as you go along.
Yeah, sure. Okay, that means I need to be more observant as to whose hands are up. So it looked like Jeremy, you've got your hand up. And then I see
Yes.
you.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. I thought I was muted. Yeah. So I think I think we should go forward with this. I mean, I don't know if I think Ed's concerns are more down the line. My main concern is just housing that's leaving the stock. So housing that's available for owner-occupied primary residences, and that sort of thing. And really the speculation that, not my issue isn't what's going on now necessarily, but the potential to really drive the market up with speculation. And, this has happened in other communities, and that would be my biggest concern. And then also, just in general, we can be more moderate with this, with what we propose to town meeting, and then go from there. It's not like whatever we put forward is set in stone. It's going to be the bylaw forever. And what was proposed and what we talked about was a pretty big step, and I question whether or not, like Ed, with anything that we put forth is gonna, like Ed said, is gonna have pluses and minuses, and yeah, and so. But to your question, I think we should go through the process of this.
Okay, all right. So Pedro's hand was up next, then Lee.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to what Ed said about the Housing Committee. I would think it's fair to say that the Housing Committee was split on whether or not a short-term rental regulation is a housing problem. I think that as we think about this piece of regulation and housing, we have to understand a little bit more about how the real estate market works, how our economy in general has been working here for the last 50 years, and how capital flows into our town. I think if you look at the stats just that Chris gave us, we're looking at a quarter of all short-term rentals that are not residents of this town. They're second homes. That to me doesn't scream out as a huge problem about second homeowners or about short-term rentals. second homeowners, I mean, this town, I think for those of you, I was not here after September 11th, but I do know a little bit about the history. And this town, I don't know, has ever seen a bigger capital infusion than after that event. And it was staggering. That is a direct sort of, it's correlated directly to the way that capital flows in our society today. There are more people with more money that are eventually park some of their money in real estate because it's a safe investment. That if it's invested in communities that are safe and that grow, or in big cities, for example, it's an investment that they can sit on and they can make. It's an investment. They'll make money on it in the future. The question of how many houses or units or whatever are coming off the market because of short-term rentals. I mean, there's just no way that we can relate any of that stuff to it. We have, a certain number of second homeowners in town. And like I said, only a quarter of them are using their homes on a short-term basis. And I'm willing to say that some percentage of those people are also using their homes to vacation up here. So it's not necessarily a full-time short-term rental. I think too, from the housing study that we need to think about is that our town, in terms of affordability, our town has showed some positive trends in the last 10 years. We have less people who are paying 30% of their income in rent and 30% of home ownership, of homeowners who are paying less than 30% of their income towards their mortgages. So there is a slight improvement in the income capabilities of our residents. I think if we're going to talk about housing, we need to talk about housing. Short-term rentals are not, in my opinion, correlated in any way. These units that have been spoken about as possibly coming on the market, there is no evidence that I've seen anywhere that has instituted a short-term rental regulation that it produces or increases the availability of housing in the community. I think if we want to talk about housing, we need to talk about how do we make more housing. There's a housing shortage, and that is our biggest issue. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Lee?
Thank you. To answer Ed in terms of some of the points that he brought up, number one, the fact that we have a 0% rental vacancy rate right there points to my belief that there is something that we need to do immediately to solve the housing crisis. And this is a multi-pronged effort. So this is the most immediate way that I can see that frees up housing. And we have a supply issue. So if we look at the 56 units of housing that are currently owned by second homeowners that are short-term rentals, that is a substantial amount of housing. Now, we don't know what type of housing that will be. That could be market rate, that could be workforce, it could be affordable, but it's housing. And when we look at the 0% rental vacancy rate, that translates to providing housing for residents that are suffering. So that's the biggest stat that I'm looking at. And when we talk about other ways to combat the housing crisis, you talk about building more affordable housing or building more housing in general. And with the cost of housing between at least $300,000 to $350,000 a unit to build, and the length of time it costs to bring that on stream. So let's say 5 years, 10 years, if you're talking about that many houses. That's a substantial amount of time, and our residents can't wait. We have an immediate problem now. We can't talk about 5 years of time and where we're going to get $300,000 per unit to come up with housing. This is housing that's integrated in our neighborhoods. That has the ability to be turned into housing for our longtime residents. So I think right there we look at the the ability for this bylaw to work immediately and work in conjunction with other opportunities to create housing. But this is not only a way to generate housing, but it also forms a deterrent, because right now we have unregulated commercial operations that are in our residential neighborhoods. And that is a problem. So I see this as a deterrent. So our neighborhoods don't become big areas of commercial operations that are unregulated, and it will contribute to solving this housing supply shortage, which is pretty significant right here if people listen to some of the stories that at least I've heard. So just talking to the stats is the 0% rental vacancy rate, and the ability that we have 56 units that have been taken away from possibility as permanent long-term housing.
Lee, if I could just ask a follow-up question to what you said about the number of units that might be immediately available. I mean, can we really be assured that they would become available? I think that is one of the difficult questions here, is what degree of effectiveness would this potentially have? And have you any insights into that, or have you thought that through or talked it through with folks that do own properties that they operate as short-term rentals, and you get a sense that they would convert them to long-term?
So one of the issues is we don't know. They have choices. They could sit on them and not make any money. They could convert them to long-term rentals, or they could sell them. So 2 out of those 3 options will add to the supply. And we have a housing crisis. We have a lack of supply. So people that can afford to have second homes right now and not rent them out as short-term rentals, most of the people are doing so right now. They're not renting them out. So what I see is a lot of, or many, I shouldn't say a lot because I don't know, but many people that are using this commercially solely to earn money. And that if they, come up with something that deters them from making money, they're going to have to make a decision whether they want to, continue to make money, but through long-term rentals, or sell it. And the fact is that they have options. And what I'm focusing on is on the people that don't have options, that don't have housing, that work in our community, that can't afford to live here, that are forced to move away. And once they move away, we lose them. Oftentimes we lose them. They take their families, they take their kids out of school, and they work elsewhere. They're not going to drive an hour and a half to work in a minimum wage job in Great Barrington. So I'm looking at the long-term view. I'm not looking at the people that have these options, that have second homes and investment properties. I'm looking at the crisis that we have right now in Great Barrington among our residents.
I don't think anyone would disagree that there's a housing shortage. So let's just continue around with the board members and see who else wanted to add to this. I see Malcolm, you've got your hand up. Yeah. But you're muted.
Unmute
There you
myself. I think the idea of converting short-term rentals to affordable housing is a red herring as far as an argument goes. I mean, I agree with Lee. I mean, it's really a longer view. In one of the letters that were sent to us, somebody made the statement that Airbnb has nothing to do with the housing shortage. That's a direct quote. And it's just not true. I mean, we have a supply and demand that determines pricing, and we have a fixed supply, and any increase in demand is going to increase in prices, all up and down the line in the entire market. And it's a fallacy to think that only expensive houses are being offered by second homeowners for Airbnb. In my neighborhood, a small under 2,000 square foot, I think it was more like 1,600 square foot, 3-bedroom house recently sold for nearly $300,000 and was immediately converted to short-term rental. It's off the market. It could have been, and it should have been affordable housing, but it's off the market. Short-term rental increases demand for housing to the benefit of those who already have housing over those who do not. And I think I don't think we should be draconian and say we shouldn't have any short-term rentals, but I do think we have to look at it and say, how can we benefit the residents of our town while not making it difficult for outsiders to use our town for an investment based on the attractions of the town without them actually making a personal investment in it. That's what I had to say.
Thank you, Malcolm. Jonathan, what did you want to add?
Yeah. Well, a few things. First of all, the notion that the short-term rentals are going to become affordable housing in any way is probably a fallacy. In the last year, as of today, there were 117 sales of residences in Great Barrington. Only 18 out of that 117 were 325,000 or less. 325,000 is kind of the upper end of what workforce housing might be. And the median sale price of a residence in Great Barrington in the last calendar year was $520,000. So to think that these houses are going to somehow increase the stock that's available to workforce, that's not going to happen. I think that if we force them to rent them, first of all, you have to realize that all of these short-term rentals are furnished. And so no one rents a furnished house. If you rent a furnished house, it's typically for a month or two, and you've come in from California to work at Jane Iredale for a month, whatever it is. But it's not the local workforce that is looking for furnished houses. And if you furnish a house, you're going to charge more for it than if it's unfurnished. And so, people, regardless of who owns it, they're going to be looking for a return on their investment. It seems to me that the approach that we've taken so far in this discussion, I think, is not required. The building code, and I had a discussion with Ed May about this afternoon, in an attempt to try to figure out how do we level the playing field between motels and hotels and second home people, or not second home, but Airbnb. And the building code is very clear that if you have a primary resident, it could be a tenant, it doesn't have to be an owner, but if you have a year-round resident, then you can rent short-term, and the building code still thinks of it as a single-family home. If it is not tenant or owner occupied, then anything less than 30 days is short-term rental, and it is, under the building code, it's a hotel. And hotels need to be sprinkled. So if we make everyone register who wants to do short-term residence, if we get them to register, if we get them to have the property inspected when they become registered, and they're inspected for, smoke and
Life
CO
safety.
detectors.
Yep.
Yeah, life safety issues. Then what happens is that anyone who's not living here or having a full-time tenant who wants to do short-term rentals, has become a hotel, and they have to sprinkler their building. So that's a huge expense, and that is going to prohibit virtually all of these short-term rentals by people who are not occupying the premises. And so to me, that's a much less divisive approach than saying, than what we've done so far.
So, Chris, you had mentioned that you think the code is changing. Do you have any comment on what Jonathan just mentioned about the way the building code may define single-family home different from a property being used as a short-term rental that might otherwise be considered a single-family home?
No, first of all, I think everything Jonathan said is accurate. Currently, the building inspector has discussed with us how the code might change. Code changes usually take a long time, so I'm not going to comment on that. I believe, if I just say one more thing, one benefit of approach like Lee has put forward is that it does not require staff inspections. One drawback possibly of Jonathan's approach is that it would require registration, local registration, staff inspections. So that's a point for discussion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. Lee, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thank you. A couple things with Jonathan's mention of the median sales price of $520,000. So a couple things about that. That seems to imply that people that currently live in Great Barrington can't afford these types of homes. And what we're talking about is that there's a supply issue, period. So I'm not just talking about affordable housing. I'm talking about housing across the board, the families that actually want to live here and invest here and send their kids to school here. They can't, there's just no housing available. So we're not just talking about affordable housing. We're talking about creating housing for people that want to invest in this community, that want to be part of this community. They don't want to be tourists. They want to live here and they want to contribute. So that's the big point that I want to make, is that we're trying to create housing for people that want to live here and invest here. What I have seen, and what some of the stories that we have seen or heard from some of the comments that have been made, are issues when houses that have been multifamily houses have been bought up by investors and turned into single family homes or turned into short-term rentals. Now, this is a serious issue. So that it is taking affordable housing off the market, and it's converting it to short-term rentals and impacting those that would normally have rented long-term, have basically stopped them from being able to do so. And, we're not, as Chris mentioned, this route of having a primary residence restriction, what this does is it takes, it doesn't need as many resources as Jonathan's approach in terms of registering and requiring sprinklers and so forth. So this is a very streamlined approach, and it's something that's happening all over America and in Europe. So I'm not reinventing the wheel. We have various examples of other municipalities that have gone down the route of primary residence restriction, such as Somerville, Massachusetts, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Boston, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Denver, Killington, Vermont, Woodstock, Vermont, New Orleans, and the list goes on and on and on. So this is not something that I've pulled out of the hat. And I've done a lot of research and tried to balance the limited resources that we have on staff to deal with registration. And I have found a monitoring software that we can afford. So I think this is a good balance. So when you do look at the primary residence restriction, the 28% is not going to shift the world in terms of stopping tourists from visiting Great Barrington. If residents or if tourists can't find their first option. And again, it's only 28% that we're talking about limiting short-term rentals. They still have plenty of options in Great Barrington. Then they might do an Airbnb in Monterey or Sheffield, but they're not necessarily going to stay and shop in Sheffield or Monterey because they don't have an Airbnb. So some of the research that I've shown is that the argument that Airbnb particularly makes in saying that a reduction of short-term rental options would affect the economic development of a town. And according to studies that I've read, number one being from an Economic Policy Institute study in March 26 of 2019, it says that the potential benefit of increased tourism supporting city economies is much smaller than advertised. And it goes on to say that there's little evidence that cities with increasing supply of short-term Airbnb rental accommodations are seeing a large increase in travelers. Instead, accommodations supplied via short-term rentals seem to be nearly a pure substitution for other forms of accommodation. And one of their studies say that indicate that only 2 to 4% of those using Airbnb say that they would not have taken the trip where Airbnb rentals were unavailable. So, and what this goes on to say is that they say that Airbnb is claiming that is basically overstating the effect of the economic activity and relating to Airbnb. So my point is that when we talk about the economic impact, if we were to restrict it to primary residences, I don't feel that it's going to be that substantial. I think that it will either go to our local businesses, our local lodging establishments, or people will go elsewhere, but they'll still come to Great Barrington. But the benefits are such that we'll actually have staff in our local establishments, so there won't be staffing issues, and there'll be more people to serve these tourists that do come to Great Barrington. So I really see this as a balancing and not an elimination of the option of short-term housing, but it's basically laying out a standard of regulations and limits the commercial operations of short-term rentals in Great Barrington in residential neighborhoods. So I really see this as restoring a balance in our community, and it's about supporting a vibrant and inclusive community that welcomes tourists and supports the workers and the local businesses that serve them. So a few people have mentioned that, they feel that investors and visitors are being portrayed as greedy, and I've never said that. I'm just trying to find a way to restore the balance in our community. And I've also done a lot of work in terms of looking at our master plan, and linking it to some of the long-term goals and visions that are in our master plan, and really looking at what's the core vision, what's the vision that we want for our community, and that includes supporting our workers and our residents. So I'll leave it at that.
Sure, thanks. And I see that Steve, Ed, and Garfield all have their hands up. I think, though, I'd like to encourage this group to maybe start taking a little bit of a different tact here. We 201, I am sure I am not speaking out of turn to say we all recognize the severity of the housing issue in our community and the fact that we need more housing, more inclusive housing. The planning board has been working on that for years. There have been a number of projects that have been built over the last few years to increase housing supply in the community. It's certainly not enough. We need more types of housing, and there are actions that have been supported at town meeting, that the planning board with the select board's input has put in place around giving the ability for some of these previously non-conforming multifamily units, maybe old Victorians that were multiple units, to get special permits and continue to be multifamily units rather than be converted to single family homes. We've passed at town meeting accessory dwelling units. So there's a lot that we've been trying to do related to housing. But with this focus being on the short-term rentals and recognizing that we do have housing challenges, what I'd like to know from this group, though, is do we feel like we are hearing from the community that there are other impacts from short-term rentals? Other communities I work with, there are issues related to nuisance, parties late at night, noise, garbage, feelings of safety and security in our neighborhoods. I haven't been hearing any of that. So, I'd like to hear from Stephen, Ed, and Garfield, and then if we can maybe start thinking about what else is really driving the short-term rental outside of affordable housing, or is it really truly just an affordable housing issue? So Steve, I think you had your hand up first.
Yeah, so Brandy, I'm glad you said what you said because it's a segue to what I was going to say. If the only reason we're doing a short-term rental bylaw is for housing, is for affordable housing or workforce housing, it may not be convincing enough because it may not sway enough houses to really make a difference. But there are other reasons that we need to look at. The whole change in the character of neighborhoods, when all of a sudden your neighborhood has 2 or 3 commercial establishments, and that's what short-term rentals can be next door to you. You don't know your neighbor. There's different people every weekend. There's noise, there's garbage, there's other problems. That, in addition to wanting to try to sway some people to have more affordable housing, that's really important. I think right now we're looking at it with tunnel vision. We've got kind of stuck on the housing market and trying to reduce the number of short-term rentals and think that that's going to magically create a lot of either workforce or affordable housing. It may create some, but maybe not enough to sway us to do this bylaw. So I think we all have to decide whether we want to do a short-term rental bylaw. And there's got to be more reasons than just this. I think that's one reason, the affordable housing, but that's only one. The other thing we have to look at as a group is, I realize registration was turned down a few years ago, but whatever business you run in the town of Great Barrington that I'm aware of, you need to register. So I'm not saying I'm totally in favor of registration, but I don't know why we have shut the door completely on it. And yes, if you register, it will be much more work on the building department, but that's part of the downside of it. But it also will give us a firm list of who is running a business, a short-term rental, and will also tell us whether they're up to code, which I thought that's what we're supposed to be doing anyways for safety's sake. So I'm not convinced that registration should be completely off the table. I'll leave it to Garfield and Ed to go ahead.
Garfield?
Yes, hi, thank you. I agree with pretty much what Lee's objectives are and what we're trying to do. What I wanted to say, and I may be oversimplifying, correct me if I am, but what I'm noticing and have seen, and you probably have seen, that the people that are against the short-term rental all own short-term rental houses and they have multiple homes. The people that are against it or for this don't have these options. They don't have it. I don't think anything should be looked at as a last objective, but I think this is part of what we need to protect are the people that have lived here the longest. I know it's not popular, but at the same time, there's been some talk, and Brandy's even said it herself, that there's the American Recovery Act out there. There's money out there. It has suggested that $1 million go to the Affordable Housing Committee. I know we're not speaking just affordable housing, but we could probably, with $1 million, afford to at least buy 2 homes and renovate them. These are what people are doing now. They're buying up these homes and they're saying, oh, we're renovating, we're making them beautiful now so people can live in them. If we are granted some monies, we could do the same thing. And we could buy these homes, even if it's just 2. And let's say there's 6, 8 people. You're helping 6, 8 people. We have to look at it as people. People are people. We just can't look at it as housing and, oh my God, the numbers, and we're not helping 800 people. We're only helping half a dozen. They're people and they have to be considered. And I think that's part of our goals should be, is looking at the long-time residents. I don't have the complete answer, I'll be honest with you, but I know there is money there that should be had.
Thanks, Garfield. Ed?
Yeah, I got a bunch to say, so I'll say it quickly. One, you will hear at Citizen Speak, I'm sure, because we've heard it at our last meeting and at the committee meeting, the subcommittee meetings. It is not just people who are doing short-term rentals who are speaking out against this limit. We've had several speakers who began their speaking by saying, I've renovated houses, I put them out for year-round rentals, I don't do this, but still I disagree. So that's just not true. A quick one thing I want to say is among the letters that we have gotten, and just a minute ago with an earlier, somebody speaking earlier, is conflating second homeowners and short-term rentals. So 2 of the homes that we have read about that were purchased and the tenants were kicked out are not short-term rentals, they're second homes, which I don't think we can stop. I don't think we can ban people. I would love to live in a world where nobody bought 2 homes until everyone had 1. We don't live in that world. We can't do that. But none of that's what I wanted to say. We have stated and restated the problem, and nobody here disagrees with the problem. We have a housing crisis at all levels. There isn't enough housing. So it's frustrating to hear when I ask a question to get the problem repeated rather than the answer. I'm looking for numbers. How many units do we think this will create? Is 1 enough? Of those 56 units, we don't know how many of them are retirees who are not going to sell it because they want to come back and visit their children and grandchildren. We don't know how many are second homeowners who can afford to not rent it out, even if they are now. Do we want all of our second homeowners in this town to be wealthy? Is that the goal of this? Because this could help with that. So what is the number we're looking for? How do we decide, is this worth it? Because there are definite costs to it. That's all I'm asking. Is it 6? Is it 10? What is the number? And then how do we know that number is accurate? What is that based on? How many second homeowners who are doing Airbnb have we talked to who said, yeah, I would sell it, and I would sell it at a price that's reasonable, and I would sell it to somebody who's local, as opposed to another second homeowner. And then to answer what Brandy's saying, I absolutely think there are other reasons to take this up. I think there's an awful lot in this proposal that's great, that we should definitely have, that puts different kinds of limits on. I just don't think we should be looking at this as going to add housing unless we have some idea what that will be. And as others who know more about this than I do have said, it just doesn't look likely. Thank you.
Yeah, and Ed, I'd like to put the housing issue kind of in a parking lot, because I think to your point about how many, that's a valid question. We would like to know, how much energy are we going to expend putting a bylaw in place? What is the impact of that? And then what is the result in achieving this one stated purpose of trying to create additional housing opportunity? And so we've now gone completely round the table at least once with everybody, and we all agree there's a housing problem. So let's maybe put that in a parking lot over here. And let's talk about other reasons why it might be relevant, other things that can support a purpose if we intend to regulate short-term rentals. And so Chris has put some of those up on the screen here as far as pros and cons. I have since we met last time, the last 2 weeks, been trying to just talk to anybody I know who has a short-term rental, who has a long-term rental, who's a single-family homeowner, who is a renter, trying to find out what these impacts could potentially be. I think Chris's list is fairly comprehensive. I don't have a sense of the magnitude, though. And so I think it would be helpful for us to understand, are we really solving a problem beyond affordable housing? Because I think it needs to be a solution that is multifaceted, as Lee had said previously. Lee, you wanted to make a point there?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Steve for actually bringing up one of the main purposes of the of what I saw as this particular draft of the bylaw, and it was to really address the community cohesion in neighborhoods, and to reduce the adverse effects of short-term rentals on traffic, noise, and just the overall effect of short-term rentals on neighborhoods. So I heard someone speak to this as a revolving door of strangers, someone said to me the other day. And, you know, when a house goes up for sale next to you and a for sale sign goes up, you know, a lot of times you bristle. You say, you know, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to that house? Is it going to become a short-term rental? Am I going to have this revolving door of strangers coming in, you know, weekly, and not know who my neighbors are anymore? And this is, you know, one of the very, very important purposes of this short-term rental is to try to reduce these adverse effects. And, you know, we've seen some of the short-term rental problems that we've had, you know, with events and gatherings and parties. And once people address short-term rentals as a way just to have a commercial operation and to make money, that's when you start risking, you know, the community cohesion we have existing in our neighborhood. So that's a really, really big point. And I heard from many people that are solely worried about that. They want to be able to know who their neighbors are. And one of the reasons with this primary residence restriction is that, you know, if it's your own residence, you're going to be more accountable. So, you know, you might not be there, but you still have your neighbors to answer to when you come back. And this addresses that. So I just wanted to make that point, and thanks, Steve, for bringing up that very, very important point about this.
Yeah, and I don't want to let the special events issues that we've been having in town over the last year or year and a half go by. I mean, planning board has already talked about whether or not we need to have some sort of special events regulation. I think what we've learned in talking with Chris and with the building department is that it's very clearly a commercial operation, and so what we've seen are cease and desist orders, which terminate those continued uses. And I think that's a separate and distinct issue from a short-term rental. When you're operating your house as an events venue for a wedding or a corporate retreat, that is very clearly commercial. I think that's very, very different from a short-term rental, where you've got, you know, couples or groups of young people or families coming in for a finite period of time. But to the point of what other impacts may there be, community character is one. Has anybody else got any input on other impacts? Jeremy, I see your hand up.
Well, I just wanted to echo something that Lee said, and it often gets confused with other kinds of changes in the community. So if we're really trying to, I know this isn't about, I mean, I don't see this as about increasing the stock of affordable housing or workforce housing, but it is one thing that comes up in communities, or at least within the micro community, when some kind of denser housing comes up, is that sort of impact on the community. And the point that Lee made about the revolving door of strangers, you know, I mean, it's something that we should remember, and that when you have, you know, workforce or affordable housing, those, you know, initially they're strangers, but over time they're not strangers, they're just your neighbors. But I worry about really focusing on not changing communities, because if we're really in a separate conversation, if we're really going to talk about how do we increase affordable and workforce housing, it's going to involve community changes. And so if we really sell this as that, you know, it furthers the belief that we can just not change anything about this town. And I mean, I've always seen that, you know, that kind of stagnation eventually leads to the decline of the town. And so anyway, I wanted to echo that point that Lee made.
In terms of this and that, you mean short-term rentals versus change that's going to happen in your community as new people come in and establish themselves? that what you
Yeah,
mean, Jeremy?
well, or if in a separate conversation, if we're going to talk about affordable and workforce housing, those are new people coming into the community, and really to differentiate that from, this kind of revolving door of strangers, which happens in hotels and B&Bs, but it is a bit different. So B&Bs can operate, all over the town, but there is some sort of person there, to help manage that. There's some person, some sort of resident there. And then, hotels are, like was said earlier, are just industrial commercial zones. And so, yeah, but that point, differentiating the two, short-term housing versus long-term housing that might be different than, single-family homes that we see now.
Okay. Ed, I think your hand went up first.
Yeah, if we don't want a revolving door of strangers, which I find a little offensive because strangers aren't all evil people, and as we all know from our stranger danger class, as when we were children, sometimes evil people are our relatives. But so aside from that, which I think is if we don't want strangers in our neighborhoods, why are we allowing it at all? Why are we allowing residents to rent out rooms? Again, I don't agree with that as a goal, but if that is a goal, it's really what we're saying is some people are worthy and others are not. And the whole idea that second homeowners don't contribute to our community, aside from financially, they donate to nonprofits, they volunteer in our community, they're in our community, they shop in our stores, as do tourists. I'm not sure why we're drawing the line between permanent residents and part-time residents when we're allowing this, if that's the problem.
Yeah, I don't think that that's the problem, but I suspect Jeremy wants to respond. Lee, if you don't mind me just going to him, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, I mean, Ed, I'm not making that point. I mean, my bigger point was that that we encounter this problem all the time with any sort of affordable or denser housing that comes up. The community that it's going in is worried about how it's going to change their community and how these people are coming into their community. And I agree with you. I mean, and I do have a big problem with us just sweeping through and changing things. A lot of people, I suspect that the straight commercial ventures were these, they had a plan. They invested a lot of money in our community, and yes, they are bringing people. Besides the money, they are bringing people into the community. And a board member had told me like this is how they came to our community. That they first visited our community, through short-term housing, and then decided to live here. So I mean, I think I'm definitely not trying to say that.
I get that.
My point is that my larger point is that I feel very uncomfortable with promoting this idea of things can't change.
Understood. Thank you. Okay, Lee.
Jeremy, could you just explain? I guess I don't really understand when you say you feel uncomfortable with things don't change. Could you explain that? That wasn't my question, but I'm just confused by what you just said.
I mean, we see it all the time. We don't want things to change, abstractly we'll vote for things, but when we experience change, locally, like on our street or on our block or whatever, then it becomes more uncomfortable. I mean, in Great Barrington in general, we're slow to change. We don't want things to really change. We talk about things in the past and we like it that way, and or we like the way things are. And I mean, it's difficult. So I mean, I don't know.
Lee, did you have something more? Because I
Is it
feel like
specific?
we're
I just had-
philosophically going around.
Yeah,
in
no, I just had
Yeah.
one really quick thing. So one of the another goals of this was short-term rentals artificially inflate rental costs and the cost of homes. So I think by regulating short-term rentals in such a way that, we'll address this, because, once you have, short-term rentals in your neighborhoods, the rental costs go sky high. And that's what happens, is that local residents are being priced out of the market, and the price of homes are going sky high. So this is one way to address that.
I think, though, that goes both ways, Lee, because there is a certain amount of investment that gets made in properties sometimes that are underinvested in. And that can then set off a chain reaction that can have an impact, like, my neighbor painted their house. Oh, yeah, I should paint my house too. And so you can have this positive chain reactions. I think we have to, again, going back to your comment on balance, we need to sort of consider the balance. So,
But
if
just,
we could,
can I
yep, go
Can I
ahead.
just answer that? So permanent, people that buy homes here that actually want to live here full time, they invest in their homes too. And, I keep hearing that only these short-term rental operators are the ones that invest in homes, where, many people that would normally buy these houses would invest in them as well. So I don't, that argument doesn't really carry weight, because I think that that's missing out the fact that people that actually want to buy these homes will invest in them, whether or not they're going to be permanent renters or long-term residents. So I think that's very, very important to stress.
My point is more that when you see improvement in your neighbor's house, whether my neighbor painted their house, it prompted my husband and I to say, you know what, we really should repaint a part of our house too that was looking a little weather beaten. So I think, it's that sort of iron sharpens iron, or, when your neighbor mows their lawn, you feel prompted to mow your own lawn sometimes. So I think investment of any sort in our neighborhoods is a positive thing. We want to see our housing stock be maintained and invested in. But I don't want to get sidetracked on that. I do want us to really get to a point where we can make a decision about whether or not we want to regulate short-term rentals. And I'm not hearing from this group at this point in time really strongly one way or another. I hear a couple of you want to regulate short-term rentals. What form that will take, I think Lee's done a great job in putting some sample language together. But I just, I feel like asking yes or no questions right now. Do you?
Randy,
Yes.
I think you're right. It's absolutely important that we come out of this meeting deciding if this group wants to regulate short-term rentals. That we need to get some direction, and we don't have it after 2 meetings. So I absolutely agree with you. We have to figure out a way to do that. We're not going to solve all the problems tonight, but we have to at least figure out if this group is going to do it or not. And then the select board or the planning board will have to decide if they're interested in doing it. If the whole group isn't.
Lee, you want to regulate short-term rentals.
Oh, no, no.
Right?
No. I mean, what I want to do is put this for a vote to town meeting. I mean, it's, we have 8 people or 10 people. I don't know. I can't count, but, we have a group of people, but we have, residents that really deserve to make this decision. So I feel that we owe it to at least the residents to put forth something that they can vote upon or amend or throw out the door. So, I feel uncomfortable making this decision and being a gatekeeper and saying, well, we're not even going to even address this issue, because I feel like the fact that we're looking at this housing needs study that has 0% rental vacancy rate screams the fact there's the housing crisis. And if we don't immediately address this, at least give an option for townspeople to vote on it, we're doing a disservice to residents.
Yeah,
But
no,
Lee, as part of the process, I absolutely agree with you that to bring it to town meeting is important. But I think we have to bring something that's more fleshed out right now as far as by the whole group. What are our goals? What are our objectives? How are we solving the problem? And we have to have some sort of an agreement on that. And I don't think we're near to doing that.
So, just taking notes through this discussion, The issues that have been mentioned are issues not only of affordable housing, I think that goes without saying now, but issues of community character, and impact on property values. Those are sort of the two big ones that I had noted, writing down. I have not, and I have sought from hoteliers information as to whether or not they feel like short-term rentals are impacting lodging taxes at all. I think Chris had put some material in our packet on that, and I wouldn't say it's clear from that financial, or maybe Mark, that was you. Can you speak at all, Mark, to the financial impact of short-term rentals and whether or not we can, from the data you've provided, get any distinction as to?
Yeah, that was me, Mark.
Okay.
That was Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you.
In 2019, the state law that became effective in January 2019 instituted the lodging tax on short-term rentals as well. So we began to see that come in fiscal year 20, so beginning July 1st, 2019. So 6 months after it became effective in the state, it started with the new fiscal year. So you'll see in fiscal 20, compared to fiscal 2019, there was a jump of $30,000 in revenue. Presumably that is because short-term rentals were starting to pay the 6% lodging tax. A bigger jump in second quarter FY20 compared to 19, and third quarter FY20 compared to 19. Fourth quarter FY20 down a little bit. It's hard to tell. Those gross revenues from lodging taxes come into the town. They're not segregated into hotels versus short-term rentals. So we don't know what comes from where. Obviously, FY21 is impacted by the pandemic, so you can see how things went down overall. But, safe to say it's been increasing the town's revenue. It's hard to say how much. And it's hard to say if short-term rentals are taking away from established hotels, motels, or B&Bs without actually talking to them. Can't tell that from these numbers.
Okay, and then there's a taxing mechanism that the town has not taken advantage of to date. Is that correct?
Correct. That same 2019 law also, not only did it extend the 6% rooms tax to short-term rentals, it also allows towns to regulate short-term rentals, but it also allows towns to impose an additional 3% community impact fee on certain types of short-term rentals. Specifically, those, I think the law calls them professionally managed, but essentially it means that if you have 2 short-term rentals in a town, one of those gets taxed an extra 3%. If you have 3 in town and you only live in one, then those other 2 get taxed that extra 3%. That's the community impact fee. It's hard to know how much that would raise, but it would raise some additional funds in GB.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's a town meeting vote. And it could be separate from any form of regulation, whether it's zoning or other regulation that you might want to pursue. An impact fee could be separate from that. It can take its own path.
That would be something the select board would potentially take up.
Yeah, we're going to put that on an agenda to start talking about it.
Okay. All right, so we don't have to dig into that now. Lee, is your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to, when we're still going back to the purposes and what we're trying to achieve, I was hoping to direct you to the version 2 of this draft, which had been rewritten since the last version. And I'll just read the 3 sentences, and I just want to get a sense of this, if this is close to some of the goals that we're speaking about. So this is under the version 2 from November 24th, the draft. And it says, under purpose, this regulation is designed to allow for the operation of such rentals for Great Barrington residents, ensure the primary use of such rentals remains residential, reduce commercial operations in residential neighborhoods, prevent long-term rental units from being replaced with short-term rentals and protect affordable housing units from conversion, and reduce the adverse effects of short-term rentals on traffic, noise, and community cohesion in neighborhoods. So those were the updated purposes. So I just wanted to bring that into the record.
Yeah, no, I think that those are, in terms of purposes, those are good purposes. I think where the rubber hits the road is, to then dig into the bylaw and see if those purposes are met through the text of the bylaw. And that, that's a pretty involved process. But I still think that sort of backing up and talking about process big picture, wanting to get something to town meeting, even in the planning board's process, were this to become a zoning bylaw, we would start with a draft such as what's in front of us now, and we would start kind of hammering through the functionality of it and tinkering with it to see, test cases to see if it proves itself out as enforceable and functional, because it's amazing what we write down and that it it doesn't achieve what we want it to achieve. And I think Jeremy pointed out that, it's a dynamic process, so we can always amend it, but we want to, get into that process. But then we go to the select board and to the public with that draft bylaw. And there are times where the feedback we get at that point in process is where we might pull a bylaw. There are many instances where we have not advanced bylaws to town meeting based on the feedback we've gotten in the public hearing process for the zoning bylaw. So I think, we'll probably get a flavor for that tonight when we have citizens speak, and that'll be really important. And we've certainly got a lot of comments. And so I don't have any issue with the purpose here. I'm still not 100% sure that, straw poll with this group, do we want to move forward with regulating short-term rentals for the purposes stated both in the bylaw and also from what we've discussed so far as community character, fiscal impacts, property values. So again, I'd really love to get a straw poll from everyone on that.
I just had a question for Chris, I guess. In terms of zoning ordinances or general, can this be a general ordinance, or is it a zoning as it's read, or how is that determined?
Well, ultimately, we work with town council to determine where it's most appropriate and then follow that process. At the end of the day, if we've done it wrong, the Attorney General will let us know, in which case it's a wasted process. So we try to do that up front. As written, it may be a zoning bylaw, your version 2. This particular version has not been sent to council, so I can't answer that for sure. A simple registration law, everybody must register, everybody must play by these rules, would be a general bylaw. Everybody must pay a tax, everybody must be inspected. That's probably a general bylaw. Mm-hmm. I think this might be a zoning bylaw as written here, but in any case, whatever form it takes, I agree with Brandy, some resolution coming out of tonight. If, everybody could say, yes, we should regulate it, and the primary reason is this, the secondary reason is this.
So Brandy, may I suggest there are 2 members with their hands up? Let's recognize them and let's figure out a way to get your straw poll.
Okay, I know, I'm just gonna start calling people's names. I don't know who raised their hand first. Was it Ed?
Do you know Malcolm?
No, go ahead.
I was actually going to suggest what you've been suggesting. I was going to ask if I could make a motion. Clearly something needs to go to town meeting. There are 35 people here other than us. I think I don't know that there's agreement on what, but I think the planning board is the group that does this kind of thing. And so if I were allowed to make a motion, it would be to refer this to the planning board to get to work on it and present something to town meeting. If I'm not allowed to make a motion, straw in favor of that, if you're taking your straw poll.
Okay, thank you. Malcolm?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to vote my straw for continuing the process. I don't know whether it's the right thing to do is begin with the registration. I think that might be a good first step, but I do think that we should discuss what Lee has proposed and see where we can go with it.
Are you suggesting, as Ed does, it goes to the planning board for discussion?
I think that's where I had assumed that this was a zoning bylaw, that Lee's portion of it, the registration, probably not. But I would think that would be where we would discuss this as a zoning bylaw.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Let's see. Lee?
So this I had used the town of Somerville, Massachusetts, as a template for this, and I believe that was a general ordinance that was passed. So I would like to get town council's recommendation or advice whether this is a general ordinance as written.
Okay. Thanks for that insight.
Yeah, Randy, there is a motion, whether you want to recognize it or not, your choice.
Ed. Yes, Ed. Okay, yes, you made an official. I'm not used to you making motions, so sorry. No, is there a second to Ed's motion?
I'll second.
What was the motion?
The motion was to continue the process by referring this to the planning board for discussion as a zoning bylaw.
Well, so without knowing if it's a general ordinance or zoning, how can we do that?
I would actually say the opposite, which is until we know what it is, what it's going to look like, we don't know if it's general or a zoning.
So we have a motion and a second, and we're having some discussion on it, right? So Chris, what's the timeline if we were to ask town council for their advice as to whether or not if this is a zoning bylaw or a general ordinance?
It will take some time if you want the planning board to take it up, regardless.
I think
that should be the motion.
Yeah, it should be better as a parallel process, just because Lee, we're going to run out of time, given that it's almost December.
And that would be your first motion. That's the easy one. The second one is, what purposes are you trying to get at?
Yes.
Let's not forget that.
No, I won't. It's high on my list. So we have a motion and a second to refer this ordinance to the planning board to take up. Do we have any further discussion on it?
Yes. Could I just get clarification from Chris that this will still be referred to town council concurrently with having the planning board look at it?
Yes. Yes.
Lee, did you hear that, or are you frozen?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Ed, how do you vote?
Aye.
Steve, how do you vote?
Aye.
Jonathan, how do you vote?
Maybe.
That's not one of the choices.
I'll vote okay. Aye.
Malcolm?
Aye.
Pedro?
Aye.
Lee?
Aye.
Garfield?
Aye.
Jeremy?
Aye.
Brandy? Aye. All right, great. We will take that up.
So you've successfully given it to the planning board, Ed.
Thank you, everyone.
That was the easy part, though, right?
Now some guidance for the planning board.
That was the plan.
Right. So Lee has worked out purposes as provided in our packet, and she has read those to us and shared them on the record. And they are, I would say, generally in conformance with what the bulk of our discussion has been this evening. Does anyone want to make a motion to pursue the focus of the bylaw consistent with the purposes provided in the draft bylaw?
Can I ask a question, or should I wait for the motion?
No, please ask questions, because I'm like
it's just about
trying to move us forward.
The last one talks about community cohesion in neighborhoods, and I don't know what community.
What does that mean? Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Sure, that's a fair question. I mean, typically we would use words for zoning bylaws more like community character, and we have lots of robust discussion about what community character means. So we might change that language to be community character, but I think character is generally the language we're using with the zoning bylaws. So it's a consistency of development pattern, or property usage. Sometimes it's a consistency of an architectural pattern or something along those lines.
Yeah, but I think my understanding of the community cohesion issue had to do with maybe, and this goes back to Jeremy a little bit, is having neighbors as opposed to strangers rolling through your neighborhood.
Well, see, that's why I asked, because I would look at it as to say something that doesn't tear apart the community.
Mhm.
Right? The community is not just made up of full-time residents, for example. So that's why I'm asking for, is that one of the things we're looking for, is something that doesn't divide us as a community?
You mean in terms of a spirited discussion at town meeting, or?
Well, that's always lovely, but just an us versus them, which one of the things that concerns me about this is we're blind to that, the people at town meeting who will vote are not directly impacted by this. It's the ones who can't vote, who are still part of our community and pay taxes. That's my concern, is part of that going to be one of the things you're looking at?
Yeah, that's a good point. Cohesion is probably going to be a difficult thing to pin down, because it's going to mean different things to different people.
One of the things that, and I'm not sure that it was on Lee's list, but one of the things that we have to keep in mind, and this has been on a lot of the correspondence we've received, is that tourism is an economic engine in our town. Now, it can be debatable whether Airbnb or short-term rental itself is an economic engine, but we also have to consider, though, the impact of tourism, and consider whether short-term rental would have an adverse, limiting short-term rental would have an adverse effect on that. I happen to think that it doesn't, and I think that we need to weigh that in terms of housing needs and other objectives, but I think that still has to be part of the discussion.
Well, and economic opportunity for homeowners.
Part of it.
And you two have abandoned the hand raising, so I want to make sure Lee gets a chance to have some feedback as well.
Thanks. Thank you. So just looking at the purposes, when I was drafting this, I was looking at the master plan, and I was looking at chapter 1, our vision of the town we want, that kind of focuses on some of the things that were important to the master plan back when it was drafted. And it mentions protecting the special places and features that contribute to Great Barrington's distinctive character, and ensuring that development contributes to the viability and character of villages. And in addressing the nature of cohesion versus character, when we have our neighborhoods, and we know the people that are living next to us, and we see them in our shops, and they're part of our volunteer fire department, and they're in their schools, it adds to that character, it adds to that cohesion. And that's what I was really trying to address. And it's not to say that we're trying to exclude second homeowners or tourists, but within residential neighborhoods, having that cohesion and knowing who your neighbors are is a really important and distinctive and special aspect about Great Barrington. So that's what I was trying to address. So if there's any questions, it was looking at really the vision that was laid out in the master plan, and trying to answer some of those those tie-ins. So
you got your hand up.
This discussion troubles me, because it always teeters really close to this notion that we've exhibited in the country and in the town, for sure, for the better part of 100 years, of trying to control and shape the people that live around us. These are notions that were codified by the federal governments, codified by local governments, and they're the cause of a lot of the social and economic inequities that we live with today. So these kind of conversations I'm really uneasy with. And another thing that makes me a little uneasy in this entire conversation is the way that we're throwing around ideas of what we think are issues and our problems. For example, our neighborhoods and problems with our neighborhoods. Well, nuisance problems, for example. A couple of weeks ago, when we were discussing this on the housing committee, I called the police station, and they have close to no complaints from this type of activity. This notion that investors, right, like the word investor, the way that it's used, where, I'm sorry, but people who are able to purchase a second home here, why are we looking at them as evil people? This notion of strangers it's so troubling to me, to bring up the word stranger. We heard this when we were discussing the housing project that was going to go in the old retirement home on Main Street. It was incredible. People were actually saying that they didn't want strangers around them. And then the notion that short-term rentals and investors buying second homes and the rest of it inflate rental markets and inflate housing markets, to me, all of this stuff is anecdote and innuendo. And I'll have a really hard time basing any kind of policy on those types of ideas.
We'll have some
Good to know. Okay. Wait, hold on. We got to keep some semblance of order here. Steve, your hand is raised, and then Jeremy.
Yeah, I just want to be clear.
Next, Malcolm.
I just want to be very clear that second homeowners are part of the fabric of this community, and they're not strangers. They're here many, many, many months, some of them up to 6 months. And whenever I've talked about strangers, it has nothing to do with second homeowners. Because if that's what was inferred, I agree with Pedro. That's just stomach turning. They're not strangers. They're part of this community. They participate in events in this community. They are as much a part of this community as full-time residents.
Thank you. Jeremy, you're next.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the strangers thing too. So, I worked, or am working, and have worked in service for the last, I don't know what it is now, 20 years or whatever, 25 years. And for the bulk of that, I worked all Friday, Saturday, Sundays, all holidays. And so I saw a lot of second homeowners. I saw a lot of repeat visitors. And hopefully what we're getting is anyone that comes to our town, hopefully they're coming back. And so, the moment they come back, they're part of the fabric of our community. And even the first time, because we're hoping they're coming back. And yeah, I totally, that whole stranger thing really upset me when it came up with the project that Pedro was talking about. I would see people, the same people over and over again. I would see people, second homeowners coming in every weekend, and then it changed to every other weekend. And then the spaces started to become further and farther between, but then they would always come back. The point about, what class of people do we want to be able to be second homeowners in this town? That really hits home for me. And, so if we just want rich people to be second homeowners, then, this isn't such a big deal going forward with this. But if we want anyone else to be a second homeowner, then yeah, it is a big deal, because, how are people going to make it work? I don't know. There's a lot. This part of the discussion that we're having, the purposes that we're listing out in this thing, I think it's so broad to try to come up with something on short-term housing that's going to achieve all these goals. I just think it's just way too broad. And we should be, if we're going to pursue this, it should be a very narrow course of purpose.
I like that suggestion. And I think with that, just in the interest of, like, I know everyone is very passionate about this topic and we could go on and on. Might I suggest we take these one by one, or possibly just focus on a purpose that reduces adverse effects of short-term rentals as it relates to traffic, noise, community cohesion, or reduce commercial operations in residential neighborhoods, you know, something that's more targeted than, Malcolm, you were the next person with your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, I mean, you know, you're mischaracterizing my use of the word strangers. When I use the word strangers, I'm talking about the people at the end of my street who come in for a week and then leave, and then another group of strangers come in for a week and leave, not the second homeowners. And I'm not penalizing. In fact, I don't think we should be penalizing second homeowners who want to rent their house out on a short-term rental. I'm talking about people who are not part-time residents, but people who buy as an investment, who purely an investment and don't reside in the town at all. I'd like to see Lee's bylaw allow second homeowners to do short-term rentals to the extent that they reside in the home. I'd like to see the multiple homes by residents' grandfather, so that we're not penalizing people who have invested in the community. But I do think we need to address these things. And you know, Pedro, we're going to have some spirited discussions, because I think it's science. I think it's the science of economics, the science of supply and demand that's driving this. And I don't believe it's just anecdotal in terms of what the impact of short-term rental is on property.
Well, if you have numbers, I wish you'd share, because we don't have numbers for any of this stuff, including the amount of investors that are turning around and short-term, you know, renting their places on short-term as strictly an investment.
Well, if you have numbers that counter the law of supply and demand, I'd like to see that as well.
I don't think we're not gonna get anywhere with this line of argument,
you know, and again, the economic issue here is not a supply and demand issue. It's a capital issue. We don't live in 20th century economic times. We live in a 50-year buildup of capital across the country that is having an effect on our town. It's had an effect at least since September 11th. But it's a capital buildup that's happened since the 1980s that, you know, none of us are even thinking about. You know, we're going after like the low-hanging fruit here. You know, but we keep electing officials that don't really address the core issue of all of our inequity, you know, our social and economic inequity.
Lee?
So in terms of the economic impact of short-term rentals and the fact that there's a shortage of workers and there's a shortage of teachers and there's a shortage of essential workers in Great Barrington that can't afford to live here, that have been priced out of this community. How do we address that? When we look at
that is a topic that is just so huge.
No,
like we're not going to solve that today.
No. But what I'm looking at is I'm looking at this 0% rental vacancy rate, the fact that there is, you know, the supply shortage. So
we all agree.
And there's an immediate. So I'm just saying that, you know, that's one purpose of this is
but that's why we formed the subcommittee.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what I was going to say, Lee. We're meeting next Wednesday, and this should be the topic of our meeting.
Yeah, but this is one way to address that. So I'm saying this is, you know, it's a multifaceted.
So I'm gonna. So it's been referred to the planning board. What I need to be able to leave with are purposes, and I don't want to talk about it for 4 hours because I think we could, but I don't think we have to, because we all know we want to create diverse housing opportunities in our community. And I think we all agree, everyone who comes to our community brings something to the community, right? So that's important. We don't want to diminish that. But in terms of short-term rental, that now the planning board is going to need to take up, I would like to be focused on the purpose. And so I would like, after Garfield says what he has to say, if we could pivot to purpose and tease out the things we feel most strongly about so that the planning board can take a more direct approach in working with this language and working it into a zoning bylaw that we feel is going to be successful at town meeting. So Garfield, what do you have to say?
For whatever type of bylaw.
For whatever type of bylaw. Thank you. Yes, true.
Well, I have to say that I think, and I could be wrong, but the interpretation, looking at Malcolm, it looks like he's had a little bit much. I think we're really tense right now. I don't know if tonight is the night to go ahead with our suggestions. That's my thought. I think even if it's a week from now, I think there's a lot of stuff. There's still some issues here that seem to be getting under everyone's craw, and I think we need to think about it at least one more week. That's my idea. That's my feeling.
I have
Getting wrong in the truth right now. We might be losing a little bit of direction. So,
I think if we could focus on the purpose, that would be great. I am concerned about delaying the discussion any further, and I was very grateful that everyone was willing to meet tonight on a fifth Monday when none of us normally have any other obligations, because when we look at getting things on the warrant for town meeting, December becomes a really critical month for working through language for town meeting warrant items. And so I feel like if we delay much farther, we don't have a good shot at getting something that this group has worked on to town meeting for the May meeting. So I would like to suggest if we can maybe spend like 15 minutes, we've got 6 purposes that are listed here. I'm going to suggest that reducing commercial operations in residential neighborhoods might be one that everyone can be fairly supportive of.
Yeah, can we just go through them all one at a time and do the straw voting?
Sure. So the first one is ensure the primary use of rentals remains residential.
Kind of got to do this by roll call, unfortunately, because
We can't raise our hands.
yeah, not in the open meeting law.
Okay, hang on here. I gotta
Would you
make
just
a
ask if
list.
there's objection?
Okay, that's a good way to do it. Ed, does anyone object to leaving in ensure the primary use of rental remains residential as a purpose? Hearing none. Does anyone object to reducing commercial operations in residential neighborhoods as a purpose?
I guess if we're defining commercial differently for a year-round resident versus a second homeowner, then I'd have a question.
Where are you finding these, Brandy?
They're on page 8 of our packet as part of the draft zoning ordinance in the first paragraph, 7.20.1 purpose. And I'm on the third line from the bottom.
I thought when we got the definitions earlier, the current law, it is commercial if you're not a full-time resident.
Correct.
Right, so what I'm aiming to do is not differentiate and divide us that way as a community. That would be my objection to that. So if there were a different word, if what we're against is short-term rentals, let's say that. But if that's a code word for who gets to have short-term rentals, that doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't lead towards making neighborhoods.
So let's skip to the third one then, which is prevent long-term rental units from being replaced with short-term rentals.
Right. I'm sorry.
Does anyone object to that remaining as a purpose? Okay. The next one is to protect affordable housing units from conversion.
I don't know how this does that.
I'm not sure either. I'd rather leave that one out because I think that is a different issue altogether.
Well, you're not objecting to it.
Right, that's the question. We didn't ask if it does this or not. We're asking if you object to that happening.
Object to what happening?
Just object to the discussion.
Go ahead.
So So the question is, does anyone object to leaving in the stated purpose of protect affordable housing units from conversion as part of the short-term rental bylaw? And Jonathan, your statement was that you don't see how short-term rental bylaw protects affordable housing units from conversion. I'm
Right.
inferring here.
I would object to that because I don't think it does this. I mean, if you're going to have purposes, then it's good to try to achieve those purposes.
Sure, no, understandable. Lee, did you have a different opinion?
I just wanted to clarify that was addressing particularly the use of taking multifamilies off the market and converting them to short-term rentals. So there are instances that affordable housing units are being taken off the market and converting to short-term rentals. There's also kind of a cascading effect with the inflated prices that short-term rentals cause in terms of the amount of affordable housing units there are. So there is a correlation between affordable housing and the conversion of short-term rentals. So,
but if we're preventing long-term rentals from being replaced with short-term rentals, is that not implicit? Is protection of
Yeah. I agree. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm okay with losing that second part of that part of it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think we can keep that intent in mind. So then the next one, does anyone object to leaving in reduce the adverse effects of short-term rentals on traffic, noise, and community cohesion in neighborhoods?
I think it's not demonstrated.
Yeah, I wonder.
As an impact?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder about. I have a little bit of a problem with that because of what it infers elsewhere.
What if it was reduce the adverse effects of short-term rentals on traffic and nuisance issues?
I would take out traffic. I don't think it's an issue.
Reduce the adverse effect of short-term rentals. The adverse effect of short-term rentals. Maybe it's just the adverse effect of short-term rentals
On neighborhoods?
On characters of neighborhoods would.
Yeah.
I don't like that either. I liked when you went directly to nuisance. I thought that was better.
Okay, how about instead of adverse effects, reduce nuisance impacts of short-term rentals?
Well,
we don't know if
I
any
like that.
exist, but
We don't have any demonstrated.
I know. I'm just
I like that because it's very distinct. When you open it up to character, it's like, then we can start. It's everything.
I know we have lots of discussion on here.
We use character too much to stop anything from happening. And I want us to be much more specific when we're trying to get at character. And so the nuisance thing for this, I think, is great, even if we haven't defined what the nuisances are.
How does everybody feel about that? Go ahead, Lee.
Steve, did you have a note about
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, just one of the some of the feedback that I've gotten about short-term rentals is that it does affect neighborhoods and the feeling of cohesion. So that could be the wrong choice of words, or it's the wrong choice of word. But I think to address the fact that something about the adverse effects of neighborhoods, and I guess I'm getting tired, so I can't think of the right word, but I think that there is an issue.
Well, we could add additional purpose, right? I mean, I think our goal is to get started with something that we feel like we can get our hands around. And so if right now we say, the purpose is to ensure the primary use of rentals remains residential, to prevent long-term rentals from being replaced with short-term rentals, and to reduce nuisance impacts of short-term rentals on neighborhoods. I think that's a good, tangible place to start.
Sure.
Does that sound good to everybody? Ed's nodding, yes. Does anyone object to that?
I
Hearing none, those will be the three things we'll focus on. Kim, did you get those?
Do we need to vote?
I marked up my copy of the short-term rental while we were talking here. So.
Do we need to vote on a final version so that it's been voted on? What we
I
can do?
don't think we do. I think we take it as guidance, but if it would make everyone feel better, Chris is nodding. We do or we don't, Chris? We don't. Okay. So no, I think the planning board will go with this, and then we'll get to work.
What will happen is when the planning board changes the purposes even slightly, it almost like they'd have to come back to this joint committee, and that's not what we want to do.
Right.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I feel like this has been such a group effort to this point that we should probably just report out to you after each meeting. I don't want to create work for Chris, so I'll have to help him with that. But
I'll just send them the recording. Thank goodness for Zoom. Are there other purposes? I mean, we've used Lee's proposal as a good starting point. There may be other purposes. The select board may take up the impact fee separately.
Right, that's what I was going to say. The fiscal impacts. The fiscal impacts. Okay.
I would say health and safety is a major issue that's not addressed here.
I think that's a really fair point, Jonathan, that should be addressed.
Mhm.
So if we add to, let's see, how would we say that?
Health and safety. That's good enough for guidance, I
To
think.
maintain life safety or address issues of life safety.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
One of Chris's possible ones was set certain standards which short-term rentals must comply. I think that's the same thing. I just want to be sure it is. I assume that's health and safety. Okay.
Yeah.
Health and safety is more sellable.
Yes.
Okay, so that's 4 purposes. If no one objects to that, then I will say that we've concluded our discussion on this part of the agenda.
So we will, Brandon, if you allow me to, we'll go to
Please.
citizen speak,
That sounds great.
and we will allow 3 minutes for each person with their hands up. There's some people who's had their hands up for a while. I'll just go in the order that there are 5 right now. So I'll start with Teresa Segala. State your name and address, and go ahead. Just unmute yourself.
Yes, hi, my name is Teresa Segala. I'm on Mill River, Great Barrington Road in New Marlborough. Thank you for giving me time to speak. My husband and I own multiple units in Great Barrington. We've been Berkshire residents, my husband for his whole life, me for over 30 years. We raised our kids here. We took care of our parents, our neighbors, our friends, and now I'm watching this happen. And I just want to ask the committee, have you gone around and driven around and passed by the houses that people have renovated and turned into Airbnbs? To see the curb appeal?
This is your chance to talk to us, not to ask questions.
Okay, well, that's one of my wondering questions that I have. But the other thing I want to ask is, well, I'd like to say, I hope that there isn't going to be a committee that's going to be telling these people how much they can charge for long-term rentals once they decide to stop doing short-term, or vice versa, because we have long-term rentals right now in Great Barrington. We do not have any Airbnbs. So this is where I think it's important to state. With our long-term rentals, we have tenants that have been there for well over 10 years. We take very good care of our tenants. Right now, currently, we have one rental that has been sitting empty for a year. It's sitting empty because we were abused by long-term rentals. The tenant did not respect the property. It was held to get them to move out. And just the shell shock alone from having to deal with that, I think, is what's pushing these owners to go to short-term rentals, because they figured people come in, they rent for a month, they rent for 2 weeks, they got to go back to their lives and their jobs, so they're not going to have the stress. I understand that the committee is concerned that there are not enough long-term rentals, not enough housing in Berkshire County. However, this has already begun. People are already renting it. They've been doing it for over 2 years. They bought properties. They came in. I'm not happy with seeing a lot of, as you guys called it, strangers on the street. But the more you get to know somebody in the store and you talk to them, it sometimes turns into a breath of fresh air when you start learning how the people became residents here, and then they loved it so much they stayed, and then they bought a second home, and they have their families. They sent them off to college. The kids come back. We've been through this scenario multiple times. All three of our children have grown up, moved away, came back. I just wanted to let you know that as a long-term rental landlord, we embrace the people that started Airbnbs because they made the properties next to our properties beautiful. We didn't have to worry anymore when someone came to look at a house whether we were going to show at dusk so that they didn't see the mess in the backyard or all the cars sitting out and the noise from other kids. I'm just trying to understand here why the committee feels that this is going to make too much of a change when the rents are going to stay high because the cost of living is so high.
Thank you very much.
Is it high?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So just so everyone knows, I'm keeping right to the 3 minutes because we have a number of people who want to speak. So I would ask you not to repeat yourself and to keep it 3 or under, please. Laura Nopler.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Laura Nopler, Prospect Street in Housatonic. First of all, thank you to all the fellow weavers of the fabric of community. Thank you for looking out for your neighbors. 20 years ago or so, we, the Affordable Berkshire Housing Committee, Southern Berkshire Affordable Housing Committee, sponsored the first Affordable Housing Forum, and it was held in the Congregational Church on Main Street. Hearing what everybody's talking about tonight and knowing the reality of our housing shortage back 20 years ago, and the title of that forum, by the way, was Housing Our Communities, Can We Afford Not to? And here we are 20 years later, and the situation is as dire as it ever was. Yes, there have been a number of affordable units built in town, but it's really very obvious from all the help wanted signs in our stores to the zero vacancy rental rate, we've got a huge problem. I am of the firm belief that a community is strong when it's diverse, when it can house teachers, postal workers, as well as people who are working remotely from home, wherever their main office is. Thank you for looking into this issue. I want to share a story that I heard the other night at Thanksgiving about a community in Litchfield County, about an investor who came from out of town and bought up more than 100 units. And he was described in buying up these units. He's an investor. He doesn't live in the town in Litchfield County, as being like a kid in a candy shop. I think we have to think about what is our vision of our community moving forward. How do we want to support it so that regular people, not just people of means, can afford to live here and participate and contribute all the valuable things that people of a diverse community contribute and make the fabric of a community stronger. I like the idea of a registration process. I think we have so much to get a handle on in terms of how many short-term rentals we do have. I can tell you that the Shopper's Guide 20 years ago, the number of vacant apartment rentals and housing rentals, there were multiple pages of listings. And then when Airbnb came in 2008, one has watched steadily as the years have gone by, watched the number of rentals advertised in the Shopper's Guide decrease. Yes, you could call this anecdotal evidence, but I think we all know we've got a tremendous problem. And I really hope that we put this question out at town meeting about how we can do this regulation so that we don't have people coming from outside who don't live here buying up properties and making them short-term rentals and just further contributing to this terrible housing shortage that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dan Ruderman.
Hi, thank you for giving me a chance to speak, and I want to thank everybody on the joint committee for all the work you're doing on a really challenging problem.
Name and address, please.
My name is Dan Ruderman. I live at 4 Nob Hill Road in Great Barrington. I'm a homeowner, and I actually have an area in my basement that I could use as an Airbnb, but instead I just use for friends who need temporary housing or visiting. I could use it as an Airbnb because it doesn't have a full kitchen. And I think that is what some of those people are seeking. But I did want to thank the committee for the work you're doing. It's hard. I don't think that there's any bad guys or villains. And I also don't think that if we go looking for the data that tells us what's wrong, we're going to find it, because that would just be lagging indicators of problems. And we all see what the leading indicator is. And I think the billboard on Main Street across from Plaza Package was a big wake-up call to everybody. There are clearly out-of-town investors that are looking to attract people who want to turn their second homes into better income properties. The analogy that might be good here is the difference between a chop shop and a car dealership. I think most of us know if you take a car and you break it out into the pieces, it's worth a whole lot more than the new car. And in a way, if we continue to let short-term rentals go unabated and unregulated, that's what we're facing. Anybody with a property is going to realize, as Chris pointed out, that 6 nights of an Airbnb rental rate is better than a month of a long-term rental rate. So that's the capital incentive for people to do it. And there's nothing wrong with saying that we want to be leaders in our town. We want to encourage everybody in our town. We want to encourage people to come and visit, but we do want to stop it from getting out of hand. And vacation towns all over the country have done that. I also think it's great in the discussions that we're keeping it limited to scope, and I applaud you for the ways that you've limited to what you're trying to solve. Clearly, there's a labor and a housing shortage in the area, and I think you've addressed that well. So I just wanted to thank you for all that. Is there more investments when people have short-term rentals? There's investments in the properties like there are any other time. Will it bring in more people to events and things like that? I don't think so. I think the argument that a rising tide lifts all boats isn't the one here. I think the problem that we have is that a tsunami of short-term rentals drowns everyone. So I'd like to see continue this committee's work, and I'm looking forward to what the planning committee comes back with. And I want to thank you for listening to citizens.
Thank you very much. Tim Newman.
Good evening. I'm Tim Newman. I live in Norfolk Road in Southfield. I've been interested in Great Barrington economic development issues for a long time. I generally salute what you're doing. I think the spirit of what Lee is proposing is excellent. There's a lot of details. I'm not sure I agree with all of them. I do think it's very important that you continue with what you're doing. My concern is that you're sort of putting the entire load on a solution which I don't think is sufficiently robust to solve the problem. And my question is, or suggestion, are there any other tools that the town has that can be brought to bear on the housing problem? You know, many resort communities across the country have one way or another invested in workforce housing. This is true in Nantucket and Aspen and other resort communities. I don't know about other ones, but I worry, I don't have the solution or a suggestion, but I worry that you'll feel disappointed at your best efforts to clear enough housing to make it worthwhile. So I would encourage you to, if you can, explore other tools to add to what you're already doing. The only other thing I would say is I'm quite sympathetic with what several people have said about this idea of them and us, you know, the outsiders. I think we need to be really careful about that. You know, I was an outsider 18 years ago. You know, we're a nation of immigrants and all those corny things. But I think it's very dangerous when you start talking about them and us. I think that's about it.
Thank you, Tim. Barbara Motz. Did I miss Barbara? Hold on. Sorry. Barbara, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. It's Barbara Motz, 22 Mahawi Street, Great Barrington. First of all, I want to thank you all for your really meticulous work in this. And I just would like to agree with several of you who said this is not a problem for today. It's really, to me, a long-term problem because short-term housing is something that I think is going to be growing. And I think we need to keep that in perspective. I'm just a little bit confused about how, speaking about neighborhood cohesion, the term stranger became equated with something evil. And as somebody just said, it's us versus them. I don't see it as us versus them. I don't see any short-term renters in my area potentially as evil. I just think that they're people that I can't form a relationship with. And I think that forming relationships is very important to me in my neighborhood. It provides stability to my neighborhood. And I think that's, I just don't get it. Why it's become something evil. I don't see it that way. I would like to have a relationship with my neighbors where I can have holidays with them and have coffee with them, and we can have long-term, we can have discussions on long-term goals and for the town, and just again stability. And I don't think it's an issue of us versus them. I don't see them as evil. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. M. Peretti?
Hi, it's Julie Peretti. I've lived in the town my whole life.
Address too, please, Julie.
125 Seacon Crossroad.
Thank you.
My husband and I have lived in town our whole lives. We've seen many changes over our years of living here. We do have an Airbnb. We have 2 units, and one is rented to a longtime tenant that we have, and we've kept her rent very affordable. And then our Airbnb has provided us with stability that we would not have had living in the town with the taxes the way they are. We have 2 children that we've sent to school here. We sent them to college, and we were able to do that because of the Airbnb. I haven't heard anybody mention that somebody who has an apartment or provides an apartment for somebody who works in town like we do, maybe a discount in taxes. That could be a solution that, maybe there is something that you can do if you do have a rental property that you provide housing for a worker in town, that you may be able to get a tax break. So I just, there's a lot of issues here. There's a lot of hot point issues for me. We've had 300 guests. They've been nothing but wonderful. They've treated my space with respect. They go into town. They ask me for suggestions. They shop at the farmer's market. They mention Berkshire Busk in, several of their reviews. They, I just can't tell you what the benefits are for them coming in. And like I said, I have one unit that I rent to, she's been there 8-9 years now, and she embraces my Airbnb people. She's helped me out. So I just think that maybe there's a solution to, maybe a tax incentive of some sort, or some sort of incentive to have somebody have a rental unit. So maybe that's a suggestion that could be kicked around, just an offer of something from the town to try to keep people, having an apartment. So for workforce in our town. So I feel like we do have, I know we probably need more, but I think Great Barrington has done a really great job in providing affordable housing. Are they all working in Great Barrington? I'm not sure. Maybe, the hill towns, they're not, New Marlboroughs, the Monterey's, the, Sandusfields, I don't know if they provide housing for people like, low income or even work housing, because work housing means you do have transportation. You can't always do a transportation situation where, there's no transportation there. If you're working, more than likely you have a car. So maybe some of the outer skirt towns can, help out with housing as well, not just always Great Barrington.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Leo Step. Just unmute yourself.
How about now? Is that working?
Yes.
Yes.
So Leo Stemp on Herbal Road in Great Barrington. So we built a second home there to use as a vacation home. We put 3 times into that home the amount that we spend on the home we live in all year round. I would venture to say that many of these homes are very nice properties, and someone talk about the fact, about the maintenance of these properties. By and large, I would suggest to you that these homes are very well maintained properties and contribute to the value of the neighborhood. I think that what you're trying to do is a very, very laudable goal. Obviously, I don't have to say that. I'm just dismayed by the way that you're going about doing it. I haven't heard any rigorous analysis whatsoever. I haven't heard any analysis about the economic impact from the standpoint of the tax base, the economic impact on the revenue accrued by the local establishments. And then I hear people talking about reducing the effect on traffic, cohesion, and noise in neighborhoods. Do you have any data on that? It's just, I'm shocked that this is government policy and you're going about it just as if you're hearing from people. I don't understand. I don't understand the logic behind that, although granted, again, a very laudable goal here. And when you talk about the nuisance factor, many of these homes are beautiful homes and contribute greatly to the neighborhood. I just don't know where this is all coming from. I think I would suggest to you that next time you meet, you try to present some data to the people who are listening on the Zoom meeting. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Mass, just unmute yourself. Give me your name and address.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Massimo Mangiardo. I'm just calling in to share my experience.
Your address too, please.
54 River Street. It was the address that my mom lived at. 54 River Street, Great Barrington, Massachusetts. Anyway, this is just my experience and to share with you guys what happened there. My mom and everyone else in that building lived there for several years, and they always paid their rent. The building was sold about 2 years ago to someone who I don't know, but they decided to sell it a few years later. They didn't manage to make any of the repairs that were promised in the sale. And the person they sold it to decided to kick everybody out with 30 days notice, with a sheriff's notice. The whole process was extremely stressful. When the tenants said that they didn't want to leave, the buyer referred to them as losers who didn't have their shit together. My mom was lucky enough to find a place very last minute, just 2 weeks ago, really. And I had to fly up from Florida to help her move. 3 out of the 5 people living in the building were in their 50s and up. One woman was over 70 and she has nowhere to go. So, I know we're talking about short-term housing. I don't know what is going to be done with this property. It's definitely not going to be a 4-family home. And I think what I believe his name is Garfield said earlier, like you have to think about what's happening to actual people, because you can't just crunch numbers and look at data and you have to understand that there's people who are having horrible experiences right now because of this. And it's maybe you think it's not a big deal to move to Pittsfield, 45 minutes to an hour from your job. But I think Lee had mentioned that you lose those people. Like and there's a job shortage there's a work shortage in Great Barrington. Like, you walk around the streets and people don't work in the cafes. They're closed because they can't find anybody to work. And it's weird to go home. Like, there is traffic. There is way more traffic. Like it's frustrating. I have never been pushed in this way as far as stress, like to try and find my mother a home, and try and figure out how I could fund something and get her a house or whatever. It's a bonkers experience right now. And I know that there aren't any specific villains or anything, but if you hear people saying like, these people, these strangers, it's because they're having bad experiences, and you need to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gabrielle Senza?
Hi, thank you. Gabrielle Senza. I have my studio on Railroad Street, and I've lived in Great Barrington for many, many, many years. First, I have a statement from Kathleen Jackson from 54 Railroad Street. She couldn't be here tonight.
She can send that in. What we don't allow is people to speak for other people. So if she emails that to all of us, or if email it to me, and I'll send it to everyone and post it on the website.
Okay, I will see if that's cool. Okay, too bad about that. So I really applaud this work that you're all doing. It is not an easy situation. I agree with so many things that you've said. Second homeowners are really crucial to our economy here. And so I'm not talking about strangers. I actually love being an Airbnb guest. I've loved being an Airbnb host. What I am concerned about is what Massimo was just talking about. I'm sorry, it's very emotional. Like, people are losing their homes. People we know, everybody here on the screen knows some of these people that have been evicted from their homes with 30 days notice right before the holidays. And that is so upsetting. Like, the reality of that, how traumatic that is. Why do these stories come through second, third, fourth hand? Because why aren't those people on this call tonight? Guess why? It's traumatic. It's traumatizing to be asked to have a sheriff show up at your house and hand you an eviction notice. I don't know if anyone here has had that experience, but I can tell you it's really traumatizing. And it's like asking a rape victim to come and say, this is why this happened, or this is how this happened. Are you sensitive enough to hear the victims of the people that are being thrown out of their homes? So this is a really big, important issue. And as I've mentioned on other calls with you all, that yes, there are cities all over the country and all over the world that have been really severely impacted, just like Massimo just spoke of, people losing their homes. They were paying rent for years. And then all of a sudden, someone turns around and they're like, okay, you're out. Why? Because we can get better rents. So could you at least, please, consider putting into place immediately some kind of moratorium on these 30-day eviction notices to tenants? It's only fair to say, I respect that you've been here 10 years, 6 years, whatever. We want to give you some time to find a place. Yes, people have said that, yes, we need workforce housing. Let's come up with some really good strategies for that. And let's really remember the humans, the lives that are being impacted here. Gentrification displaces loads of people. We've seen it in our cities all over the world, all over the country. So I don't think we want that for Great Barrington. I'm pretty sure none of you on these boards want that for Great Barrington. You don't want to continue, I don't want to continue seeing my friends, neighbors, and families who've been here for 30 years or more moving out of town and going to Greenfield or wherever because they can't afford to live in their hometowns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lucas.
Hey everyone, thanks for all your time here. I can see that a lot of work and effort has gone into all this. So my name's
name and address, please.
Yep, my name's Lucas. I own a property at 18 Castle Hill Lane.
I need
I'm
your
also
last name for the record.
merchant.
Thank you.
So I am also the owner of Berkshire Vacation Rental Management. We are the company that has the billboard up on Main Street that people keep bringing up. I just want to provide a little bit of insight into that. So it's myself and my business partner. We're a small company based in Boston. My business partner and I both own properties in Great Barrington that we use as vacation rentals. And when we're not using them, we're in Great Barrington. I consider myself part of the community of Great Barrington. I'm there frequently. My family uses the house frequently. I think this bill is very restrictive to that. I also wanted to, also bring up, we manage about 40 homes total in the Berkshires. About 3 or 4 of those are in Great Barrington. So, the point of the billboard being, a major sign to the times, I think is irrelevant. I also can speak to, every single one of our clients are people who live in, a major city and who like to spend weekends or, up to a month in the Berkshires. And when they're not there, they need to be able to monetize their home. There's nothing illegal about that, and it's not a new thing. People have been doing this for, as long as second home markets have existed. So I just wanted to quickly point that out. I also am really impressed with everybody's ability to sort of call out the points and the lack of statistics and data that are being brought up as it relates to the problems of short-term rentals. To me, it seems like there's no clear data to support any of the claims that are, being put forth and what Lee's bill is designed to address. So I really, I appreciate everybody's ability to kind of, point out those issues. The final point I want to make, I live in Boston. To compare Great Barrington to Somerville is, I also think, kind of irrelevant. Somerville is part of one of the top 10 metropolitan areas in the United States of America. So the housing problems that they're seeing in Somerville are very different than I think a town like Great Barrington. So those are my points, and I appreciate you all taking the time. And again, I've been really impressed with the panel's ability to sort of think about this objectively and try to bring more statistics and hard data into the equation, because ultimately there are a lot of people who own second homes that are absolutely a part of the community in Great Barrington, but need to offset the cost of their home by doing short-term rentals. Thank you.
Thank you. Nan Weil?
Yes, I need to unmute myself. Okay, so I
Name and address, please.
Nan Weil, and I'm on Main Street, Great Barrington. I'm going to reiterate what I did at the last meeting, which is let us get back away from the numbers and the statistics and the data, and remember that these people who are being evicted are your neighbors and the people that voted you guys into office so that you would take care of our greater needs, that you would be looking out for our benefit. And I want to point out that there are several existing multi-unit properties that have been repurposed for conversion into short-term rentals that benefit people who live or don't live here. But in any event, they are taking away homes of people that have actually invested in the community and are a part of the fabric of our community and are a part of what makes our community an intimate place to live. And I've nothing against second home owners. I kind of don't like that they're only part-time because there's such a dearth of rental property for the people who live and work here and have brought up their children. But no, strangers is not about strangers. And I think, thank you very, very much, Malcolm, and whoever else it was that deferred to the fact that their term, using the term stranger, was a misrepresentation, and they did in no way mean to malign people who are here, who don't live here year round. Relationships with neighbors, very important. It's a part of the, as I say, the intimacy of the neighborhood. And I have already sent you letters from people who are neighborhood dwellers who have seen properties next door convert into multi-unit dwellings. And yes, there's more traffic. And they feel less at home as they walk the streets of their hood. So anyway, go back. My main point, as I say, is let's get human about this. Let's remember that the people that are being evicted are people that you might have grown up with or you know intimately. And let's take care of them. Let's set up very reasonable regulations, nothing that's draconian, but reasonable, that prevents people from being kicked out of their homes and STR properties totally getting out of hand in terms of their numbers. That's it.
Thank you, Dan. Eileen Mooney? Mark, which net phone number is Eileen's?
Eileen, you there? You should be able to speak. You're unmuted, Eileen.
Yeah, I think I have to actually let her phone.
Oh, I believe she's the one that ends in 100.
Okay, that's what I thought it was. Okay. Go ahead, Eileen, just unmute your phone. Press *6, you know that.
Okay, all right. It took 5 times according to my telephone. I did not mean to raise my hand. I'm sorry.
No problem.
After all, bye.
Hi, Eileen. Ron Blumenthal, I believe that's who it is.
Yes, that's me. Ron Blumenthal, East Street in Great Barrington. Thank you for all of this work that you're doing. I think the smart thing to do here is to pivot. And what I want to pivot to is how to address the 0% vacancy rate. There's been a 0% vacancy rate here for 20 years. Someone said there was a housing shortage 20 years ago, and there's been no change since then. I've been renting houses here as a, I hate to use this term, but I'll use it, as a landlord for 20 years. I have never had a vacancy. So nothing has changed here. And I don't do Airbnb here, as I've said to you guys in writing, but I don't want to be constrained from doing so would I choose to do that. But the main thing is there's not enough housing. So how do you get more housing here? You guys are the planning board. There is a lot of municipal money available to set up industrial revenue bonds for people to do renovation or to build new housing. It's available extremely low rate. I've done it in other places, and I'm not too smart. So you guys can get it done. If you need more capital, municipal bond fund for renovators and developers, that's planning. That's a long-term strategy. To just look at the pie and try to cut it up differently, no, make more pie, do more planning, set up some kind of agency, public-private partnership. It's been done in lots of places. Make more housing. As I've said to you in writing, every unit of housing that I own, and I don't know how to do it for less, $250,000 to $350,000 per unit. The biggest cost is financing. If you lower the financing, you'll get lower cost housing, and it's a win for everyone. It's a win for the town, and it's a win for the tenants, and it's a win for the people who do it. That's all I have to say. Please get going on that instead of circling around short-term rentals, because it's not going to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Last is Justin Henderson.
Hello, Justin Henderson, 145 Hurlburt Road. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to, I'm sorry to be repetitious. I just wanted to say that I don't think there's any way objectively that restricting short-term rentals in this fashion impacts positively long-term affordable housing. The key being affordable. To limit short-term rentals to only primary residents renting their primary resident will effectively eviscerate the short-term rental market for residential properties. You're going to be left with the 2 or 3 hotels and official codified B&Bs, which isn't much. That will have an economic impact, and it will be severely negative. There will be more shops closed, less work for people. The problems at the heart of the spirit of this bill are not going to get any better. In fact, they could be worse. If my property is all of a sudden restricted from being rented in short-term fashion, we'll probably sell it, and it will sell for well over $2 million. And it's not gonna help long-term affordable housing. It's probably gonna make it worse. It's gonna drive up the comps in the area. And who's going to come buy it? Affluent New Yorkers and Bostonites are going to come buy it, and they're going to spend less time in Great Barrington than any short-term occupancy would yield. So the combination of the lack of data, the stipulation that there's a nuisance, when I heard during the meeting that there's essentially no nuisance complaints, yet we're still talking about nuisance. So I feel like I'm very sympathetic to the human component here and the emotions around getting evicted and all that. But this isn't about saving people from being evicted. That's not going to have this won't have any effect on that. This is about limiting people's use rights to the properties that they've paid for. Comparing this to an investor in some random town that came in and bought 100 properties is asinine. So, I mean, I hate to remark directly against some of the citizens responding here, but we're not in the data. We're so far from the data. All we're talking about is emotion, conjecture, and anecdotes. I haven't heard one time. I've joined every one of these meetings. I haven't heard one time what the number is on the tax dollars that are being brought in right now, because expect that to go to asymptotic to zero very fast, because you're right now collecting 6% of all these rents, which is probably a large annual dollar figure. And how's the town going to recoup that? Are you going to let police officers go? Are you going to let more teachers go from impacted school classes already? I mean, this is just a big departure from the goal. And I think the impact of this is going to be so woefully ineffectual that it will be repealed if it ever gets passed. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. There is one more person with their hand up, so I will allow him to. Johnny, please state your name and address.
Hi, my name is John Londoner. I'm at 9 Francis Avenue in Great Barrington. And I just want to suggest to the committee to really reach out to the local businesses, also to the short-term rental owners and the police department to address this, quote, nuisance, unquote, problem. I also want to dispense with this ridiculous notion that short-term rental owners are less attentive or less accountable for their property. I don't think anything could be farther from the truth. I'd also like to dispense with the idea that short-term rental owners don't care to protect and maintain the residential character of the existing neighborhoods. I'll give you a quick anecdote and then I'll, let the meeting conclude itself. My next door neighbor, her mother passed away a week and a half ago. She reached out to me to see if my place was available so that she could have relatives stay there. I said, it is available, and of course I will not charge you. I'm happy to help out in your time of grief. And she was very appreciative of it. I have great relationships with my neighbors, Andrea, Margaret, Chris, Jason, Peter, Melody, George, Dave. And you can feel free to ask them. Ed, you live just up the block from me. You know the property on the corner of Francis and Pleasant, and I think I've done a pretty good job at renovating it, and I've done a good service in bringing tourists and their money into the neighborhood. So I'll just conclude with that, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Media time. Seeing none, unanimous consent, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Enjoy the cake, Brandy.